I moved into that little place shortly after my 27th birthday. It wasn't anything extravagant. Just 2 small bedrooms, a single bath, and a porch that creaked when the wind hit it just right. But it was mine. Dixon, Illinois wasn't exactly what you'd call a dream town. But after years of living in thin-walled apartments with noisy neighbors and bass-heavy music that rattled the walls late at night, I was ready for some peace. I wanted space that was truly mine. Anybody else out there burned out on apartment life? Drop a comment and share your stories. The house next to mine on the right belonged to a woman named Cynthia. The first time I saw her, she was out in her yard wrestling with a garden hose that had somehow wrapped itself around her ankle. It was late April, one of those days that felt more like July than spring. She was wearing old jeans, a fitted tank top, and a ball cap that shaded most of her face. Still, even from where I stood, half hidden behind a moving box full of pans, I could see there was something steady about her. Like she had things figured out in a way I hadn't quite managed yet. I didn't say a word that day, just stood there and watched as she untangled the hose, chuckled to herself, and went back to watering her flowers. She glanced up once, and when our eyes met, she gave me a small wave. I waved back. That was all. But somehow, that tiny moment stayed with me. I found out Cynthia was 40 gradually, over the next few encounters. Once near the mailbox, another time while I was dragging out the trash, and again one lazy Sunday morning when I was struggling with the lawnmower. She stepped out onto her porch, holding a mug of coffee, sunglasses perched atop her head, and watched me wrestle with the starter cord. "You pressed the primer button first, right?" She called over, smiling like she already knew the answer. I hadn't, but I gave a confident nod anyway. Still in her slippers, she walked over and got it started in a few tries. "It always acts up when it's been sitting a while," she said. Her voice was calm, smooth, just the kind of tone that naturally pulls you in. That was our first real conversation. Nothing deep, just a chat about the yards, the block, and what had brought me to town. I mentioned that I'd taken a job at the warehouse outside the city. She didn't ask any more questions. She just sipped her coffee and stood beside me while the mower hummed between us. After that, we slipped into a rhythm. Most mornings, I'd catch a glimpse of her heading to her car with a tote bag slung over her shoulder. I eventually learned she worked downtown, something administrative. She moved with the confidence of someone who had her routine down to a science. Everything about her felt intentional, graceful even. I started looking forward to seeing her. It wasn't anything huge, just little moments, like the way she smiled when she caught me fumbling for my keys, or how one evening she handed me a Tupperware container and said, "I always cook too much, and you look like a guy living off microwave meals." She wasn't wrong. One evening, I was sitting on the porch with a beer, watching the sky shift. She came over with a bowl of watermelon and dropped into the chair beside me without asking. "You've got the best sunset view on the street," she said. "Mind if I borrow it?" I didn't mind at all. We sat there for hours that night. She told me about her divorce, which was 10 years behind her by then. No drama, just 2 people who had slowly drifted in different directions. She talked about how she loved old movies, and how small-town life could be both cozy and suffocating at the same time. I opened up too, telling her about the warehouse job, and how I couldn't shake the feeling of not quite fitting in anywhere. She didn't try to fix it. She just listened, really listened. At one point, when she laughed, her hand brushed against my arm. That's when I noticed how close we were sitting, how warm the space between us had become, and how right it felt to just sit there with her. When she got up to leave, she didn't say goodnight. She just gave me this look, held it for a beat too long and said, "See you around, Bobby." I watched her walk back across the yard, her porch light clicking on behind her like the final word on the night. Something shifted after that. I didn't know exactly what it was yet, but it felt like the beginning of something new. From that moment on, things were different, subtly but undeniably so. It was in the quiet moments that hung a little longer, the sideways glances we exchanged without speaking. It started small. I'd come home from work and sometimes find a container on my doorstep. Homemade lasagna, baked chicken. One time there was a piece of chocolate cake with a sticky note. "This sounds dangerous. Don't say I didn't warn you." See, I always brought the containers back clean. Sometimes with a thank you note, other times I'd walk them over myself, hoping she'd ask mean. Most of the time she did. Her house had a warmth to it, like cinnamon or fresh herbs, depending on the day. It wasn't fancy, but it felt full of life. She reached over. There were shelves of books, little souvenirs from places she'd traveled, postcards and frames, small sculptures, old photographs that looked like they came from another chapter of her story. One night, I brought over a 6-pack and offered to help with a kitchen drawer that was sticking. I had a vague idea of how to fix it, but the thing came right off the tracks as soon as I pulled it. She laughed. "What is it you do again?" I shrugged. "Pretty sure it's not cabinet repair." We left the busted drawer sitting on the counter and ended up on her couch instead, each with a beer in hand, chatting about nothing too important. A storm rolled in later, the kind that taps the windows gently at first, then grumbles in the distance like it's thinking about getting serious. She had a blanket draped across her lap, and somewhere in the middle of our quiet talk, she reached over and draped half of it over me too. I didn't, then came that smile lean in right away, but I felt the light brush of her hand on my leg as she shifted it. Her foot settled next to mine, just barely touching, and neither of us moved. When I finally turned to look at her, she was already watching me. Then came that smile. It wasn't flirty or coy. It was just real. He leaned in first, slow and careful, like I didn't want to break whatever was holding us together in that moment. She didn't pull back. When her lips met, it wasn't rushed. No sparks flying or dramatic music. It was quiet, warm, steady, like we were both caught in the same tide. I stayed the night. Two stayed the night, remember waking up before the sun. The room still dark with the curtains pulled shut. The only light came from the soft blue numbers on the clock beside Herb. She was still asleep, her hair spilling across the pillow, her hand resting lightly on my chest. There was a mug on the nightstand with some faded words printed on it. "Be kind. Rewind." Probably from some long-gone video rental place. It made me smile. I didn't try to name what we had. Didn't want to box it in or look too far ahead. All I knew in that quiet morning light was that I felt good, at ease. Like I could stay in that "we made coffee" moment and not need anything else. Later on, we made coffee side by side. Her in one of those soft, warm ropes, me still in the jeans I crashed in. We didn't talk about the night before. There wasn't a need. It was in the way she handed me my muck, the way her fingers brushed my arm as she passed behind me. We just kept going like that, somewhere between friendly neighbors and something harder to define. By the time summer rolled around, we'd found a rhythm. It wasn't exactly a relationship, at least not one we ever labeled out loud, but it had its own shape. Most evenings, we ended up together. Sometimes for a simple dinner, sometimes just side by side on her porch, drinks in hand, listening to the cicadas fill the gaps in the conversation. She started calling me back, sometimes teasing, sometimes soft like she didn't even notice. I started calling her C, which made her laugh the first time I did. "There's something kind of undercover about it," she said one evening, stirring sugar into her tea. "Like we're running a secret op or something." "Maybe we are," I said, half joking. But there was truth in it, too. We weren't out there broadcasting whatever this was. Her friends didn't stop by when I was around. And when we bumped into each other in town, at the store, or the coffee shop, we kept it light. Just a nod, a wave. Nothing too, we kept it light familiar. Honestly, I think we liked keeping it just ours. No outside voices, no pressure, just a quiet sort of comfort we could both slip into. But even good things can get heavy if you hold on to them too long without shifting the weight. One Sunday afternoon, she asked if I could help her clean out the attic. I showed up in work gloves, grinning like an idiot, thinking it'd be a couple of boxes and a chance to goof off together. Instead, we ended up knee-deep in memories. Old high school yearbooks, postcards from places I'd only seen in magazines, photo albums from her 20s and 30s, exes, friends, family I didn't know. There was one photo that caught my eye of her and Amon who looked straight out of an outdoor gear ad. Windbreaker, confident smile, arms wrapped tight around her. She noticed me looking. "That was David," she said. "We were married for 5 years. I didn't ask for details and she didn't give any." She stared at the picture for a second longer, then slid it back into the box like she was closing the lid on something. After that, I went quiet. No tout of jealousy. Exactly. Just that sudden awareness that there was a whole life she'd lived before I ever showed up. Parts of her world I'd never know. Rooms I'd probably never walk into. Later that night, lying next to her in bed, I asked, "Do you ever feel like I'm just passing through?" She turned to face me, her voice calm and clear. "No, but I know you could." I waited, hoping for more, but that was all she said. And I didn't push. She wasn't wrong. A part of me still didn't know if I'd stay in Dixon long term. I was saving up, thinking maybe I'd head somewhere new eventually, start fresh. But Cynthia, she had roots. Her life was steady. Full calendar, familiar routines, a long history in a place I was just beginning to settle into. Still, I didn't feel ready to leave. So I stayed another night and then a few more. Before long, her place started to feel like a second home. My toothbrush sat next to hers. My hoodie was draped across the back of one of her kitchen chairs. She started adding my favorite snacks to her grocery list, written in her neat, looping handwriting. Some mornings, I'd wake up early and spot her on the porch, wrapped in a robe, sipping coffee with her legs crossed, staring out at the street like she was watching something only she could see. That's when it hit me. You ever been to Asheville? Wasn't in the middle of falling for her. I already had. She was the one who brought up the trip. I still remember how casually she said it over dinner one Friday evening. Grilled salmon, roasted veggies, and a crisp glass of white wine that turned her cheeks a soft pink. You ever been to Asheville? She asked, twirling her fork lazily. I shook my head. Heard of it? One of those artsy towns in the mountains, right? She nodded, her eyes lighting up. I haven't been in ages. Thought maybe we could go, just get away for a bit. Shake off the we hit the road dust. I didn't need to think twice. Yeah, let's do it. We hit the road the next morning just as sunlight began creeping over the rooftops. Her SUV was already packed. A small cooler with snacks, a tote full of books, and a flannel blanket folded neatly in the back seat like it had made this trip before. She looked relaxed, hair pulled into a low ponytail, sunglasses already on. It was about a 5-hour drive through rolling green hills and into the Blue Ridge Mountains. We didn't rush. Wes stopped at roadside stands, poked around in dusty antique shops, shared a bag of kettle corn from a guy with a sleepy dog under his table and a toothpick tucked between his teeth. We talked the whole ride. Not about anything too deep. Just the kind of stuff that fills the spaces. Road trip music. Foods we couldn't stand growing up. That awkward middle school dance where she wore sparkly jeans, she's still a little embarrassed about. We laughed until our faces hurt. Asheville welcomed us with sunshine and music. Floating through the streets, Wes stayed at a small and tucked behind some art galleries, the kind with creaky floors and hand-scribbled notes left on the pillows. That first night, we wandered through downtown, dipping in and out of cafes and shops, eventually finding a rooftop bar that overlooked the city. The air smelled like jasmine and craft beer. I remember sitting beside her, her knee resting against mine, both of us watching the city lights give way to stars. This feels like a bubble, she said softly, barely above the jazz playing inside. Like Wes stepped outside our lives for a little while. I nodded. Yeah, I don't mind the back at the inn pause. Back at the inn, the room felt almost too quiet after all the movement. She stood by the window for a long moment, looking out at the street below. I walked up behind her, wrapped my arms around her waist, and rested my chin on her shoulder. Thanks for inviting me, I said. She leaned back against me. Thanks for coming. We stayed up late talking, touching, kissing. Nothing rushed. No need to define it. Just warmth shared in the dark like the world had gotten small enough to hold between us. The next morning, we found a breakfast spot with mismatched mugs and thick, buttery pancakes. I snapped a breakfast photo of her laughing mid-sip of coffee. It's still one of my favorite pictures. Not because she looked perfect, though she absolutely did, but because she looked free. On the drive home, the conversation slowed. Not because anything was wrong. It was just a quiet, easy kind of silence. Her hand rested on my leg most of the way, her thumb tracing soft circles on my jeans. When we finally turned back, everything looked the same. But we weren't. We had something now. A shared memory. A little pocket of time we could both hold on to. After Asheville, things changed between us, but not in a dramatic way. It was like how a fire settles once it's been burning long enough. Less flicker, more warmth. We didn't feel the need to fill every silence. We just understood each other a little better. Like being away had somehow drawn us closer. She'd knock on my door when she had something new simmering in the kitchen. I'd show up Athers when I finished work early, sometimes with takeout, sometimes empty-handed, just looking to be near her. We still had nights tangled up in blankets in each other, the TV buzzing softly in the background. But not every night was like that. Some evenings she was tired. Some nights I couldn't sit still. Sometimes we just sat quietly on the couch, her head resting on my shoulder, my hand on her knee, both Ophis letting the time stretch out. Then one day I stopped by and found her, surrounded by papers, receipts, old folders, handwritten notes scattered across the table. Her brow was furrowed like the whole world was pressing in on her at once. What's all this? I asked, Tax's me voice soft. Taxes? She mumbled, glancing up at me with tired eyes and sorting through my mom's estate. She passed away last year and I've been love isn't about big gestures putting it off. I didn't offer advice. Just pulled out a chair, poured us each a glass of wine, and sat with her as she went through the stack of papers. Sometimes love isn't about big gestures. It's just being there while someone does something hard. We had our little routines, and for a while, that brought comfort. But along with that comfort came something else. It started showing up around the edges, not full-on distance, but quiet questions creeping in. Where was this heading? Were we just two neighbors who stumbled into something tender but undefined, or were we building towards something lasting? Neither of us asked. Neither of us said. Things began to change much at all, but things began to change in subtle ways. She stopped leaving leftovers on my porch. I stopped tossing my laundry in a bag when I knew she'd be home. We still talked, still shared time, but those moments became fewer, more spaced out. Then one night, I found her sitting out on her porch alone. It was late and she was cradling a mug, steam curling up into the cool night air. I sat beside her, quiet at first. After a moment, she spoke. "I've been thinking about selling the house." The words hit like a quiet thud in my chest. "Oh yeah," I said, trying to keep my tone even. She gave a small nod. We both knew what that meant, nothing set in stone, just considering it. I nodded too. We both knew what that meant, and neither of us said what we were really thinking. That whatever we'd been, whatever this connection was, it might be nearing its natural conclusion. Not because of a fight, not because anyone hurt the other, but sometimes people just drift. Needs shift. The moment you're in starts to fade, and no one's to blame for it. I was learning then love doesn't always come with a roadmap. It didn't fall apart all at once. No shouting, no slam doors, just a slow, steady unraveling like mist lifting off a field. You don't even notice it's gone until you realize it's not there anymore. We still waved in the mornings, still sent the occasional message, but the closeness had been replaced with something quieter, something more formal. There's one Sunday that still stands out. It was raining steady and soft, the kind of rain that turns the whole world into thesmal of damp earth and fallen leaves. Used to love Sundays like that with Cynthia. We'd curl up with coffee, maybe throw on an old black and white film, and let the day pass without needing to do anything. But this Sunday, I was myself. I made a pot of coffee, took a book out to the porch, but couldn't seem to focus. From my spot, I could see her kitchen window glowing across the street. She was moving around inside, maybe cooking, maybe baking. I thought about walking over just to say hello, but I didn't. Something in the air had shifted. Like we'd stepped back across a lane, becoming what we were at the beginning. Just neighbors. People who once shared a quiet corner of life, but weren't walking the same path anymore. I saw her less after that. She was busy. I had my own things going on. Fall crept in, and with it came a stillness I couldn't quite name. It wasn't icy, just settled. Then one evening, sometime in late October, I noticed a for sale sign posted in her yard. My stomach dropped even though I'd been expecting it. She'dn't brought it up again since that night on the porch. But she didn't need to. I let a few days pass before saying anything. Eventually, I walked across the street, knocked lightly, and when she opened the door, she looked like she'd been waiting. "I figured you'd stop, Bee," she said with a smile that was soft but didn't quite reach her eyes. We didn't talk long. She said she wasn't moving far. Just wanted a place that was easier to take care of. Something quieter, smaller. I nodded, told her as Mahler nodded understood, and I did. We hugged on the front porch, simple, warm, but not drawn out. Then she placed her hand gently on my arm and said, "Thanks for being part of this chapter." I didn't have the right words for that, so I just gave her a small nod. "Same here," I finally said. "You made this place feel like home." We didn't say we'd stay in touch. We didn't try to make future plans. Some people were only meant to be with you for a Cynthia was mine season. And Cynthia, she was mine. After she left, it didn't hit me right away, but within a few days, I started noticing how much quieter the street had become. Her place sat empty for a while. The curtains stayed drawn. The porch light never came on. I kept catching myself glancing that way, waiting out of habit for her car to pull in or for that soft music she used to play on Sunday mornings to spill out the windows. But there was nothing, and in small details that stillness. I began noticing all the small details I'd overlooked before. Harold porch chair now collecting dust. The faint marks where her wind chimes used to hang. Even the way her lawn grew a little uneven, like the house itself had stopped trying. Life moved on as it always does. Work, groceries, bills. Life moved on, went on a few dates here and there, nothing serious. But every time I tried to connect with someone new, it only made me remember how simple things had been with her. Not perfect, just love doesn't vanish genuine. One afternoon, I saw a couple walking through her front yard with Ariel estate agent. They looked young, early 30s maybe, with a little kid waddling across the grass and a golden retriever sniffing everything in sight. They were pointing at windows and smiling. Something sank inside me for a second, but then it rose back up because that's how life works. People leave, others take their place. Love doesn't vanish. It just shifts into something, it just shifts new. I didn't see Cynthia again for a long while. Not until the following spring. I was downtown at the farmer's market weighing tomatoes and debating whether the peaches were worth the price when I heard someone say my name. I turned and there she was, sunglasses on, denim jacket, hair tied back. She looked the same but lighter somehow. We hugged. The kind of hug you give someone you knew deeply but hadn't seen in a while. Quick, solid, honest. We chatted quick, solid, honest for a bit. She'd moved into a condo on the north side, started taking pottery classes. She looked settled, peaceful. When she asked how I was doing, I didn't lie. "I'm good," I said. "Took a little time, but I'm good now." She smiled and rested her hand on my arm for just a moment too long. "Me too," she said. And now she smiled, think we did all right. We stood there for a few seconds. Two people who had once shared something real now simply sharing a quiet respect. Neither of us asked for numbers. No promises, just a simple goodbye. And then she walked away, and I stood there watching her, not with regret, but with something softer, grateful. She had been part of my story, and that was enough. By the time summer came back around, someone new was living in her house. A young family with a crying baby and a dog that barked at its own reflection in the sliding glass door. One evening, I helped them move a dresser up the steps. The guy handed me a cold beer afterward, and we sat on the porch talking about lawn care. He was a good guy. His wife. He was a good guy was kind too. But I didn't mention the woman who used to live there. That story belonged to me. I'd see Cynthia now and at the movie theater, then around town. At the post office, the grocery store. Even once at the movie theater. We both showed up alone to see the same film. We ended up sitting together. Didn't plan to. It after the movie just happened. She still laughed at the odd little moments most people missed. Always loved that about her. Still do in a quiet way. After the movie, we walked to our cars and said goodnight. No long pauses, no invitations. Just a hug and that same gentle smile. She wasn't just a huge ex. Not quite a friend either. She was something else. Something smaller and softer. Like a song that once meant everything and now just brings a warm smile when you hear the first few notes. Lavender. Sometimes when I sit on my porch in the evening, I catch the memory of her perfume, lavender, maybe something deeper, and I think about those quiet nights we shared. Porch lights glowing, crickets in the background, conversations that curved slowly through the dark. But I don't miss her the way I once did. What I miss is who we were together, the honesty. And I think if I don't miss hair, you asked her, she'd say the same. We were never meant to be forever, just long enough to matter. And we did. Now we're neighbors again. Not by distance, but in that strange way people can carry a part of someone even after they've gone in another direction. To keep the lawn tidy, keep the lawn tidy. She still waves if we pass each other on Main Street. And when it rains on a Sunday and the world gets quiet, I pour a cup of coffee and sit by the window. Sometimes in the hush between raindrops, I see her in my mind and I smile. Because some stories don't need a perfect ending.